geared to what we need right now, what you are asking for. That is a failing.
And failing, yes.
It is a failing. I mean, let's admit it. The idea of anybody getting it easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, we're not set up for that. Do I think we should be? Yes, but we're not.
As questions continue to swirl about why more people are not being tested for COVID-19, more shutdowns across the country. The nation's first coronavirus containment zone is now in effect. March Madness canceled. The NBA and Major League Soccer suspended. Lights on Broadway are about to go dark. All this happening as the president creates confusion over his Oval Office address after saying most travel from Europe would be suspended for 30 days. The markets have fallen once again. Trading halted for the second time this week. But today was one of the worst in history and the worst day since Black Monday in 1987. And overseas, Italy's death toll continues to mount, that nation recording its largest one-day jump in cases. While in Brazil, the president's right-hand man has tested positive for coronavirus. He was pictured with President Trump just days ago. Unfortunately, it's been another day of disturbing headlines as we fight this pandemic. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We certainly wish we could begin this show with a different headline, but the COVID pandemic is now rapidly changing essentially the way we live. In just the last 24 hours, there's been a dizzying number of sports leagues and events canceled or suspended, concerts, Broadway shows, Disneyland. The list may continue to grow because there is no escaping it. COVID-19 is here in the U.S. and spreading at an unknown rate. That's because health officials say that they just don't know what they need to know due to the lack of available testing. What we do know, however, is that there are 1,300 cases and at least 39 people dead nationwide from COVID-19. President Trump remains confident his administration has everything under control. Questions are now being raised by this photo of a member of the Brazilian president's delegation who has since been diagnosed with COVID-19. He's seen here standing with President Trump and Vice President Pence at Mar-a-Lago. Meanwhile, a key member of the White House's coronavirus task force has some stark warnings about what's to come. We're going to talk to Dr. Anthony Fauci in just a moment, but we begin with the latest on the developing crisis. Here's ABC News Live anchor Tom Yamas.
Tonight, preparing for life in the pandemic. In New York, National Guard troops tasked with delivering an estimated 400,000 pounds of food. The first shipments sent directly to that hot zone outside of Manhattan. We were there as the food arrived.
Here in New Rochelle, the National Guard has been activated. They're bringing in bags and bags of food. These are mostly non-perishables, but they also have lunches prepared for children, breakfast as well. There's a lot of uncertainty right now in this area, but one thing is certain. They want to make sure families don't go hungry.
So many here told to stay home, living in the nation's first containment zone. This warning outside of a reported testing facility. Keep all windows closed. More than 100 cases here in New Rochelle. And in New York City, with 42 new cases today, the mayor declaring a state of emergency.
I think we have to fully understand this is the shape of things to come.
This as New York bans all gatherings of 500 people. Starting tonight, the lights will go out on Broadway. The Great White Way told to shut down, along with performances at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center.
So we're going to take very dramatic actions in that regard to reduce the number of people in contagious environment.
New York following the lead of states like California, Oregon, and Washington, all cracking down on crowds because of the coronavirus. More than 2,100 school closures nationwide, affecting an estimated 1.3 million school children. Scores of colleges and universities also canceling classes. From San Jose to Salt Lake to Boston, so-called surge tents popping up, ER rooms preparing for potential patient overflow, as doctors across the country are sounding the alarm on the need for more testing.
Right now, we're really limited, and the demand for testing far outweighs what the state's capacity is.
Today, federal officials were pressed on who was in charge of making sure people who needed to be tested, including healthcare workers, are.
There's not one person that can ensure that these tests can be administered. Yes or no?
My colleague is looking at me to answer. Here we go.
Okay.
The country's top infectious disease doctor making this admission.
The system is not really geared to what we need right now, what you are asking for. That is a failing.
And failing, yes.
It is a failing. I mean, let's admit it.
As doctors scramble, so are Americans stuck overseas.
To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
The president's surprise travel ban on most flights from Europe, leading to chaos at some airports.
It's just honestly pandemonium. No one knows what's happening. I don't know if this ban currently applies to U.S. citizens, but I'm not going to risk it because I do not want to be stuck in Barcelona for 30 days.
The White House later clarifying the ban will only apply to foreign nationals, not citizens or green card holders. But travel could get worse. The president not ruling out imposing domestic travel bans.
Are you considering any travel restrictions within the United States, such as to Washington State or California?
We haven't discussed that yet. Is it a possibility? Yes, if somebody gets a little bit out of control, if an area gets too hot.
And overnight, a scare in the air for passengers aboard a JetBlue flight from New York's JFK to West Palm Beach. Officials say a passenger alerted the crew upon landing. He received a notification he tested positive for the coronavirus.
An individual on this flight got a text that he tested positive for the coronavirus.
The plane and both airports sterilized. Passengers released, told to monitor their health over the next few days.
And our Tom Yamas joins us now from here in New York, where officials are adamant that mass transit is not shutting down, as of now at least. So, Tom, tell us more about the precautions that are being taken here, and also what's happening just north of here with the National Guard now arriving in New Rochelle.
That's right, Lindsay. Well, listen, cases have spiked here in New York City, so Mayor de Blasio has declared a state of emergency, and Governor Cuomo has now banned any sort of gathering with 500 or more people. That includes the Great White Way Broadway, so the lights will be out on Broadway starting tonight. Now, we do know that mass transit is not going to be shut down, but transit officials admit that ridership is down, so clearly riders are concerned. Now, New Rochelle, we were there earlier today. As we mentioned in our report, they're expecting 400,000 pounds of food, and if you're home wondering why they're trying to get food out, it's because so many families rely on their kids to get square meals, at least 2 square meals a day in public schools. And with some schools closed there in New Rochelle, these families will at least get some meals to their kids. They'll also get some non-perishable foods. But Lindsay, I got to tell you, one of the images that really stood out to us today was that image of the reported testing site outside of New Rochelle. It says it right there in a traffic sign: keep all windows closed. Lindsay?
All right, Tom Yamas, thank you for that report. Another day of historic losses on Wall Street. The Dow sinking 10%, its worst day since the Black Monday market crash back in 1987. Investors are clearly not excited about President Trump's plan to deal with the growing impact of coronavirus. And some action by the Federal Reserve didn't help that much either. The sell-off actually got so bad today that trading was briefly halted because stocks fell too far too fast. Today's loss was the 5th worst decline for the Dow in history. ABC's Rebecca Jarvis is down on Wall Street to try to help us make some sense of all of this. Rebecca, with so much uncertainty about coronavirus, how bad could this really get?
Well, I think that's what Wall Street is trying to figure out right now, Lindsay, especially with that news. The NBA games canceled for the foreseeable future. March Madness canceled. Disneyland shutting down for a couple of weeks. These are dramatic events that even a few weeks ago might not have been anticipated. And what I was hearing here down on Wall Street a couple of days ago, when all of Italy decided to shut down, that's where Wall Street really got the sense for how dramatic this could be here in the United States. And the fact of the matter is, Lindsay, there are decisions right now being made, and those decisions that are best for public health are not the best for the health of the economy. And 100% of the time, public health is going to take precedent. It is going to win out, as it should. And the economy, at least in the near term, is going to feel the pain of that, Lindsay.
That's a really good distinction to make. And at what point will we be in a recession?
So we will have to see whether or not we're in recession. If we have 2 quarters of back-to-back falling contraction, where the economy is not growing, in fact, it is actually slowing down and contracting, that is the technical symbol of what happens in a recession. But we already very likely, if there's going to be a recession, we very likely are already in the midst of one. And at least, at a very minimum, Lindsay, in this quarter, the one that we're in right now, we will see that contraction, because it's just not possible to have so many companies telling their employees to work from home, so many businesses canceling conferences, so many companies literally shutting down business. It's impossible not to see an economic impact from that.
All right, Rebecca Jarvis, thank you for that sobering news. We appreciate it. Now, the fallout on Wall Street was partially driven by confusion over the president's address to the country last night and whether the announced measures, including restrictions on travel from Europe, will help effectively combat the crisis here in the U.S. as Congress debates what actions to take next. And now, new questions about the president's recent interactions with the Brazilian president's press secretary, who has now tested positive.
Everything is going according to plan.
Frankly, the testing has been going very smooth.
But today, even some of the president's fellow Republicans weren't buying it.
People should not say, if you want a test, you go get a test right now. That's coming. That's not here at this point.
Well, we're not the best equipped nation in terms of testing. That's absolutely obvious.
We all want on a date. We all want to be told by Friday there'll be 10 million tests available. The problem is they can't tell us that.
And there was that acknowledgement from Dr. Anthony Fauci, the government's leading expert on coronavirus.
The idea of anybody getting it easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, we're not set up for that. Do I think we should be? Yes, but we're not.
And the president also falsely said today that everybody coming to the United States from Europe is being tested.
Well, we have them very heavily tested. If an American's coming back or anybody's coming back, we're testing. We have a tremendous testing setup where people coming in have to be tested.
That claim is not true. ABC News has spoken to multiple people who returned to the United States today from Europe who were not tested. The CDC did not respond to questions about the president's comments. Today, the president is facing questions about whether he himself should be tested after he was photographed over the weekend in Mar-a-Lago with a Brazilian official who has tested positive.
Let's put it this way, I'm not concerned.
Here is another image of the president with the same man who tested positive. Still, White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham said in a statement, quote, both the president and vice president had almost no interactions with the individual who tested positive and do not require being tested at this time.
John Karl now joins us from the White House. John, the president's speech last night had multiple misstatements that then had to be clarified and seemed to do very little to calm concerns about the nation's readiness. How is the White House responding to the pushback, including from Republicans in Congress?
Well, Lindsay, it had some really stark misstatements about the president's own proposals. The details of the travel ban turn out, or the restrictions on travel from Europe turned to be very different from what he described. He said in the speech that there would be restrictions on goods coming from Europe. That's not true. We were told not long after the speech. Very little by the way of response to that, but this has become a serious issue for this White House, and that is the question of credibility. Can you believe what they are saying? That's been, of course, an issue as long as Donald Trump has been in the White House. But now, during a situation like this, where you have a real crisis at hand, it becomes especially important.
Right. And John, where do negotiations stand between the White House and Congress on economic measures to help Americans impacted by this pandemic? And are there signs that they can even reach an agreement?
Well, actually, this is interesting, Lindsay. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, I am told, has had 5 conversations just today with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin about putting together a package to deal with the economic impact of all this. And I have been told by people on both sides of those conversations that they're actually going quite well. They expect to have an agreement that would provide some help for those most directly affected by this in terms of paid sick leave, making sure that the testing, any coronavirus testing would be done without any cost to those being tested, and providing other measures to help those who have been hurt by this, by the incredible economic impact of this crisis. So it sounds like they're making progress. We could see the House vote very soon on that, and the Senate would follow suit next week.
Finally, a bit of good news, John. We'll take it, John Carl, for us
Yes.
at the White House.
Thank you, Lindsay.
We're joined now by NIH and Coronavirus Task Force official Dr. Anthony Fauci. Thanks so much for joining us, Doctor.
Good to be with you.
So you testified today that the U.S. testing system is currently failing and that we're not set up for universal testing. Who's responsible for this failure?
You know, I don't think it's anyone that's responsible. What I was referring to is that the system as it was originally designed was really designed for a patient-to-doctor relationship in which the CDC would make a test, give it to the public health authorities in a particular state or local section, and that if someone needed a test, they would get an individual test. What it was not designed for was the broad, more global, as it were, screening, where you could not only just get a test for an individual, but you could go and essentially blanket the country to find out how many people are actually infected. That was something that was originally worked really very well for the systems that were in place then. Right now, we are making very rapid steps to going towards, I would hope in the next week or so, where we'd be able to get the commercial individuals involved, commercial companies, so that you can then much more easily get a test. But when I said it failed, I didn't mean it failed in the sense of what it was originally designed for. What it was originally designed for worked very well. But we've transcended that. We need to do much better. We need to get out there and get much more testing. And I believe that will be available relatively soon.
So you're optimistic that that will be able to fix this?
Yeah, no, we are going to fix it, for sure. We're going to fix it. I mean, we have to admit that in the beginning we didn't have what we needed, but now we will fix it.
And so at this point, who needs to advocate in order to build the capacity for the universal virus testing?
No, it's already being done. I mean, the HHS on the
At least 9 lawmakers who were present at Mar-a-Lago are now in self-quarantine due to their interaction with the Brazilian president's press secretary, who has tested positively for coronavirus. Should President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence be doing the same thing?
No, I think we're going to obviously leave that up to the White House and personal physician of the president and the vice president. So I won't comment that. I'm not very familiar with the details of that interaction, and that's why I would leave that to the president and the vice president's White House physician.
You have praised President Trump's new travel restrictions. Do you think that they go far enough? And should they also apply to Americans coming from Europe, like that infected lawyer who caused a spread in New Rochelle, New York?
Well, let's talk about travel restrictions for a moment. The early on decision to essentially stop the travel, put very significant travel restrictions on China, really saved us an awful lot of hurt, as it were, because we had some seeding of individuals from China, which led to then secondary infections, but they were relatively few considering what would have happened. You know, in contrast, the Europeans did not do that. And unfortunately, our colleagues in Italy are suffering for that because they're having a very bad situation in Italy. The more recent travel restrictions were based on scientific data. If you look at the number of new infections that are occurring globally, about 70%, the majority of them, are coming from that European Union group there that we talked about last night. If you look at the states in the United States that have new cases, the majority of them are coming from that region. So I thought it was, even though it's a lot of difficulty and it was a difficult decision, I think it was the prudent and right decision to make, because when you want to stop the spread of virus, you do it 2 ways. You prevent anything from without coming in, and even as important, if not more importantly, you try to contain and mitigate the spread in the country. And that's why we're doing those kinds of things that are called social distancing, where you don't go where there are crowds. You telework where you can. You don't go on trips with crowded planes. And if you're an individual who's elderly or with chronic conditions, you absolutely don't go on a cruise ship.
And President Trump has said that COVID-19 will disappear, that, quote, one day it's like a miracle, it will disappear. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, you know, it depends on what you mean by disappear. People will die, but it will be much less than if it just went up like that and we did nothing about it.
Yeah, so a colleague of mine was just saying, you know, we should all just be prepared that we're going to get it. Do you think that that's the appropriate attitude?
No, I don't think it's the appropriate attitude. The appropriate attitude is to try and do something about it. And I just outlined the two ways: from without in, try and block it, and within, do whatever you can to distance people from each other so they don't spread. You can blunt that curve. To just throw up your hands and say we're not going to do anything about it is not appropriate and not good public health.
Now, doctors are restricting at this point who they can test. Can you explain who can get a test?
If a person goes to a physician and says they are sick, they need a test, the previous restrictions that we need to make clear are no longer there. The previous restriction was you had to have either come into contact with someone who was a known coronavirus patient or had some interaction with someone who was a contact. Now, you go in, there are no longer those restrictions. You go to your physician, you say, I feel sick, I may have some symptoms associated, and you get tested.
Okay, last question to you, Dr. Fauci, and again, we appreciate your time. What can you tell us about the treatment trials? What medications are helping?
Well, there are no medications that we know are helping because, as you said correctly, there's still treatment trials. So what's going on in China and what's going on here in the United States is testing a couple of already developed drugs to see if they have activity against the coronavirus. We've got to be careful that we say we have drugs. There's nothing been proven. You have to give the drug to hundreds of people and compare it to a situation where you just give them standard of care. And after a period of time, if that drug works, you make it available to people. But we're not there yet. We do not know if these drugs work.
Anything that you just want to say to the American people that you feel like we need to know?
Yes, I think that ahead we have to be prepared that we will get more infections. The way we can respond to it and mitigate it is to do the kind of distancing socially. In fact, if you go to coronavirus.gov or cdc.gov, you could take a look at what the kinds of things you should be doing. They're spelled out very clearly. It's easy to do. Just click on a computer and you'll see them.
Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
And turning now to all those major cancellations we've seen increasing over the past 24 hours. Today, the NCAA announcing that they have canceled this year's March Madness basketball tournament after various operations for disruptions of services and the possibility of having to self-quarantine. And of course, the cruise industry has been majorly impacted by this spreading virus as passengers in the Bay continue to make their way off the contaminated cruise ship. ABC's senior national correspondent Matt Gutman has more tonight from California.
Tonight, the American entertainment industry shutting down. The cascade of announcements coming fast in recent hours, punctuated by Disneyland's statement that it will close what is perhaps the icon of American entertainment until the end of the month. And for the first time in all of their histories, the NBA, Major League Baseball, soccer, and the NHL suspending their seasons. And the NCAA suspending its hugely popular tournament. If it happens, March Madness will not happen in March. And the coronavirus hitting the heart of the NBA, the season suspended after two Utah Jazz players, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, tested positive for the virus. Earlier this week, Gobert, trying for a lighthearted moment in a dark time, playfully touching tape recorders and microphones at a news conference. And then, moments before tip-off Wednesday, with fans already in the arena, the NBA sending everybody home after discovering Gobert had tested positive.
The game tonight has been postponed. You are all safe. And take your time and leaving the arena tonight.
The Jazz now in self-quarantine, as are all the players in the 5 teams they recently played against. Gobert apologizing, writing, "At the time, I didn't know I was infected." And arguably Hollywood's most relatable star, Tom Hanks, revealing he too has contracted the virus. The Oscar winner, who has diabetes, posting this picture to Instagram from Australia, saying, "We felt a bit tired, like we had colds and some body aches." Hank's wife, Rita Wilson, who's a breast cancer survivor, also testing positive for the virus days after performing in front of a sold-out crowd in Brisbane. The star of Castaway and Saving Private Ryan revealing that they wanted to play things right and get tested. The closure of Disneyland, part of the ripple effect of an executive order issued by California's governor.
We do have in this executive order the ability to commandeer existing private sector assets, including hotels and motels.
3 empty hotels already taken over. More have been earmarked. This comes as California still grappling with the last few hundred passengers aboard that stricken cruise ship. This is the second outbreak aboard a Princess cruise, compelling the cruise line to cancel all cruises for 60 days. Viking Cruises following suit.
And Matt joins us now live from Oakland, California. Matt, you've just spoken with the governor's office about the enormous problems with testing there. What do they have to say?
The major problem with testing is that they have received test kits from the federal government that lack, I'm going to read this, RNA extraction kits. Basically, that means the tests themselves are not faulty, but they can't get the results here locally, so they have to send them all the way to the CDC in Atlanta. That doesn't help public officials here very much. They want test kits that can yield automatic, immediate results so they can get people the help they need quickly. That's a major source of frustration here, and they say a public health threat.
We've seen several states already move to cancel school. Could California, the nation's most populous state, follow suit?
Just in the past couple of hours, the city of San Francisco has canceled schools till the end of the month. We've seen it in Washington state, and I am told that it is very likely that over the next couple of days, we will see schools possibly statewide canceled. And Lindsay, that affects over 6 million people, 6 million children. And obviously you think about school lunches and the implications for childcare with all these children. It is a logistical nightmare, also parental nightmare.
Right,
Lindsay.
6 million children. All right, Matt Gutman, thank you for that. When we come back, breaking news, airstrikes in Iraq after the U.S. blames a group linked to Iran for that attack that resulted in the death of 2 U.S. service members. The awful side effect of COVID-19, a disturbing rise in hate-filled attacks targeting some Asian Americans because of the coronavirus. The death toll continues to rise in Italy, and authorities fear the worst of it could still be weeks away. We'll hear one family struggle when we return.
I've never seen Milan like this. It's so sad and depressing, but the government doing their best in a positive way. And I feel it that in tomorrow, there's a brighter side of this crisis.
Country continues to suffer from the coronavirus outbreak. Over 1,000 people have died, with nearly 200 of those deaths happening in just the last 24 hours. And in a historic move, Rome has ordered all of its Catholic churches closed because of this pandemic. And as the virus spreads, so do the calls for help. ABC's James Longman has the latest.
Tonight, a heartbreaking call for help. This man saying his sister, lying on the bed behind him, is dead, falling victim to the illness Saturday. He says the authorities abandoned him, claiming they refused to collect the body at first, only coming after his pleas. She's now one of more than 1,000 Italians who won't wake up from Italy's nightmare. Makeshift tents to treat the sick, fighting for their lives and their dignity. One hospital reportedly receiving a new patient every 5 minutes. Experts warning Italy is still 2 weeks away from the outbreak's peak, as more than 60 million people are urged to stay at home. This doctor in Madrid, another victim of Europe's contagion, documenting his illness to thousands of followers.
I'm symptomatic right now. I feel tired with little dry cough.
The virus does not discriminate. The world's most famous soccer star, Ronaldo, in home isolation after a teammate tested positive for COVID-19. And the wife of Canada's Prime Minister now showing symptoms after a trip to the UK. The Trudeaus now both in isolation, waiting for their results. And in the UK, a dark warning from Prime Minister Boris Johnson about what lies ahead.
Many more families are going to lose loved ones before their time.
And late tonight, France's president echoing that alarm, closing all schools and universities, calling it the most serious health crisis France has faced in a century.
And James joins us now live from quarantine in London. We got to ask you just right off the top, how are you feeling, James? You're all right?
Yeah, feeling good. Thank you, Lindsay. This is just a precaution. No symptoms.
Right, of course. All right. We just heard those strong words from the French and British prime ministers. What are they doing to make sure France and Britain don't end up in the same precarious situation as Italy?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, it's actually really interesting. Britain and the rest of Europe taking a very different approach to coronavirus. Here in the UK, we have so far had 10 deaths. That's a lot fewer than Italy. But we're told the peak of the virus here in Britain won't come for another 2 months. And so we're hearing now from British officials that there are certain things immunity in the long term. He thinks that it will give us some kind of herd immunity and that would allow the virus to pass through the population and only protect particularly groups that are at particular risk, so the elderly and hospitals. The problem with that, critics will say here in Britain, is that there's no vaccine and you can actually get this illness more than once. So actually, a lot of people could be at high risk. So a big disparity between what Britain is doing and France. We heard Macron there speaking. Universities are closed, schools are closed. In fact, every single level of the education system all shut down. And these are measures that Europeans are taking across the continent. We'll have to see whether there's a huge divergence in the cases in the weeks and months going forward. One last thing, though, I have to say, it's quite interesting that Donald Trump decided to ban all travel from Europe, even though they are taking these quite extraordinary measures of social distancing, and yet Britain is not doing that. Yet Donald Trump has allowed travel from the United Kingdom. So a lot of questions here about exactly why that happened. Lindsay?
And James, just making sure I heard you correctly, so you can for sure get it more than once?
Yeah, well, that's the advice here in Britain, is that you can get it. There's no vaccine, so you get it again. It's a little bit like the flu. I mean, you can get vaccinated against the flu, get it and not get it one season, but you can get it again. So right. I think the point is that whether or not you can or can't, there's so much uncertainty. Sure. So why would Britain be taking this chance, Lindsay?
Right. OK, James Longman, we appreciate that. Thank you. And earlier we spoke to a doctor in Milan. He works in one of Italy's largest hospitals for infectious diseases. He describes what he's been seeing in his hospital and what the situation is on the ground there.
For this kind of epidemic, we are forever unprepared. It is impossible to imagine to have the number of beds of intensive care unit sufficient to offer assistance to everybody in such a situation. There is a large quantity of patients, and every 5 minutes probably we have another admission. In other words, there is an imbalance between the need to admit and the possibility to send home a patient. We have also young people with serious disease. Of patients needing assistance should increase at least for another week or two.
It is our best hope that Italy is not a sign of things to come here. We still have a lot more to get to on the coronavirus crisis. An unprecedented day in the sports world. The NBA It has certainly been a stunning day of cancellations in the world of sports. So let's take a look by the numbers. All four major North American sports leagues with spring games, the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, and Major League Soccer, have now officially suspended or postponed their seasons. The NBA acting first last night with 2 players on the Utah Jazz now testing positive for COVID-19. According to ESPN, 259 games, or about 20% of the schedule, had been left to play this season, and it's unclear when or if they'll resume. Now, for Major League Baseball, it means at least a 2-week delay to opening day, which had been set for March 26th, and the suspension of spring training. The 124th running of the Boston Marathon, planned for April 20th, may also be postponed until this fall. That's according to local reports. And March Madness, both the 68-team men's tournament and 64-team women's tournament, have been canceled completely, meaning there will be no college basketball champion in 2020 and no brackets to be filled out or busted. And on a day that we need some levity, allow me to celebrate that my UVA Cavaliers will remain champions for one more year. And when we come back, our conversation with Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban about the stunning suspension of the NBA season. And we'll speak with Asian American business owners who say because of the coronavirus, foot traffic has ground to a halt. But first, here are some of the trending headlines on abcnews.com.
ABC News, straightforward.
This is a very fast spreader.
Signs of the pandemic can be seen across the country.
In light of all those changing realities, it is time now to declare a state of emergency in New York City.
New York following the lead of states like California, Oregon, and Washington, all cracking down on crowds because of the coronavirus.
Trump announcing drastic new measures to fight the outbreak, calling for a series of stimulus measures to help the economy. Today, trading was halted for the second time this week as financial markets continue to tumble.
This is a historic closing, down 10%. We have not seen that for a very long time in the market. What Wall Street is contending with right now is the stark choices that are being made in communities across the country between public health and the economy. And public health has to win.
The NBA suspending its season after several of its athletes tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The NHL and Major League Soccer doing the same. And there will be no March Madness, the NCAA canceling men's and women's remaining tournaments in 2020.
The cascade of announcements coming fast in recent hours, punctuated by Disneyland's statement that it will close what is perhaps the icon of American entertainment until the end of the month.
Starting tonight, the lights will go out on Broadway. The Great White Way told to shut down, along with performances at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center.
While Congress scrambles to pass a new COVID-19 relief bill, next week's Senate recess now canceled.
Right now, we have to find our common ground, work together to get this done as soon as possible.
And former Vice President Joe Biden releasing his own plan to deal with the outbreak.
And it's critical to mounting an effective national response that will save lives.
Have a major crisis, and we must act accordingly.
And breaking news now overseas, the U.S. is responding to that terror attack in Iraq. Pentagon officials confirmed they are conducting airstrikes in Iraq in retaliation for the rocket attack Wednesday at a U.S. base north of Baghdad that killed 3 soldiers, including 2 Americans. The Pentagon blamed militant groups backed by Iran for that attack that also injured 14 people. Officials just confirmed the strikes were conducted against a militant group backed by Iran at 5 weapons storage facilities across Iraq. The coronavirus is impacting communities across the globe, but here at home, it's also leading to disturbing occurrences. Many in our Asian American neighborhoods are reporting that foot traffic is down and business has slowed or ground to a halt. Even more troubling, we're seeing a disturbing rise in hate-filled attacks. This has now led some to worry about how to defend themselves. Gun sales in certain neighborhoods, that's actually up. Our Kira Phillips has this report.
It's disturbing and disheartening.
If you are from China, I'm surprised they even let you over here.
We're talking about racially motivated crimes inspired by fear over the coronavirus.
Now I'm going to share it to my family.
As COVID-19 spreads across the United States, so does an alarming rise in hate crimes within Asian American communities.
Why did they do that to this car? My heart just sunk.
This car vandalized in California. The language too disturbing to show you. And the Chandy family is devastated. Anna, in tears, forced to explain to her child what the racial slurs mean.
Why are they being racist to us? We don't even have the coronavirus.
And then there's this video, posted to Facebook, now part of an NYPD hate crime investigation.
So move.
The video, horrifying. An Asian American minding his own business as a total stranger berates him before spraying him with Febreze. New York City's transit department now calling this incident racist. The CDC also weighing in now, saying that being of Asian descent does not increase the chance of getting or spreading COVID-19.
So I'm breathing this and I'm breathing everything that they bring to our country, you feel me? And that's a pandemic.
But many Asian Americans are increasingly reporting that they're being singled out.
If you're from China, I need to know.
In videos filled with misinformation being shared on social media, on the street. Coughing because he was choking on water.
This was the first time that I've ever felt I was being treated differently for being Asian.
Dylan and his family are now suing Walter Reed Middle School and the Los Angeles Unified School District, saying other non-Asian students in his class don't face the same type of treatment. The school district not responding to our requests for comment.
He actually said to me, he goes, all the other students who are coughing, they don't get sent out, but they're not Asian.
Mixed messaging not helpful as certain politicians, like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, one of several House conservatives, calling COVID-19 a Chinese or Wuhan coronavirus. Now, Asian community advocates around the country are speaking out.
I think this is kind of unprecedented. This is not just affecting Chinatown here, it's affecting Chinatown in North America and globally.
From foot traffic to small businesses, Chinatowns and Asian American communities across the country severely impacted in the face of COVID-19.
I think there's a great deal of misplaced fear directed at the Asian community, which is very, very unfortunate because this disease is not ethnic-centric.
For 40 years, Jing Fong has been an institution in New York. Now, the largest restaurant in Chinatown is closing down temporarily in the middle of the week.
If this continues for another 2 months, we don't know if we're going to remain open anymore.
With a staff of 180 employees, Jing Fong is seeking ways to keep the lights on.
On a busy holiday, about 75% tourists. On a normal, like Chinese New Year, it's maybe 25% tourists. But now we get 0 tourists.
Temporary closures and steep discounts hitting these restaurants hard, and business owners trying to figure out how they'll make ends meet.
呢個絕對係我哋最重要嘅問題就係咁樣，開又死，唔開。
Our best to protect the customer and our employee.
The increased racial tension has also led to a rise in gun sales in parts of the country. Some Asian Americans feel unsafe, and they're beginning to arm themselves in response.
Well, last year we did with this company about $100,000, and year to date we already did like almost $70,000 sales.
Arcadia firearm and safety owner David Liu says business is booming.
This is like a sales for my purchase for last 4 months of 2019, and this is how much we have. Just this little binder, and this is what we have for this year. All this here.
And as people in times of crisis have turned to buying guns before, some Asian Americans are doubling down, fearing not only a spreading virus, but also a rise in racism that's forcing them to take drastic measures.
Why did you decide to buy a gun right now?
For self-defense.
Wow, and Kira Phillips joins us now live from Washington's D.C.'s Chinatown. We saw the powerful and sadly hateful impact this virus is having on some people. How is it impacting businesses and people's general state of mind in that particular neighborhood?
Well, Lindsay, I'll tell you, here in Chinatown, in Washington, D.C., it's definitely not what I am used to as I've come through here throughout the years. Foot traffic definitely low. Even the Friendship Archway, the Chinese Friendship Archway behind me, not lit up like it usually is. I had a chance to talk with workers within the hotels here, the restaurants, all telling me that business is down. And I went into a little local Chinese gift shop, and I asked how business was there as well, and she said it hasn't been as good as normal. So I bought a hanging fortune from her, this one representing, thought it was pretty apropos, good health. And also, Lindsay, UNICEF, which defends children's rights around the world, came out with a statement today talking about this very issue, saying we remain on the ground working in affected They published a story, 5 ways to fight racism and xenophobia. Lindsay?
All right, that good health trinket, I think we all need that right about now. Kira Phillips, thanks so much for your reporting tonight. Moving now to a shocked sports world tonight, the NCAA canceling March Madness and the NHL, MLB, MLS, all following the NBA's lead and suspending play.
This is crazy. This can't be true.
That's what Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban first said after hearing the NBA would be placed on hiatus in the middle of a Dallas Mavericks game last night. Here he is looking at his phone and finding out that news for the first time. That reaction likely similar to what many Americans were feeling yesterday as story after story trickled in. The NBA's decision in response to Jazz star Rudy Gobert testing positive for COVID-19. In this video on Monday, 2 days before he was tested, Gobert downplayed the crisis. You see him there touching every microphone at a news conference. He just apologized in an Instagram post saying, "I hope my story serves as a warning and causes everyone to take this seriously." One of Gobert's teammates, Donovan Mitchell, also tested positive for the virus today. And Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban joins us now. Mark, thanks so much for making time at what's probably an incredibly busy and difficult time for you and your team.
Yeah, it's been crazy. Thanks for having me. It's just unbelievable, just not something you ever could have anticipated.
I'm sure. Now, you just got off of a league-wide conference call with all the owners. Any new information that you can share with us about what the league plans to do next? And do you see the NBA season resuming at some point?
I hope it resumes. Nothing really I can share. I mean, other than the league is going to do what's best for the safety of our employees and for the fans and customers. We're going to try to do the right thing.
Given how connected the league is, are any of your players or coaches planning on quarantining at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we've asked everybody to self-quarantine. You just never know what exposure you've had. And, you know, but we're treating it no differently than we're doing with all the other employees that we have. Everybody's got to be vigilant. Everybody's got to be careful and really just, you know, close your circle of friends so that you're not exposed to people that you otherwise don't know.
Were you uneasy at all about having your team finish the game last night? I mean, was there any thought of suspending the game in the middle after the news came out?
I mean, it always crosses your mind, as it did mine, but, you know, because it was so stunning. But no, I mean, you know, we had 17,000 people who were in the arena, and not because of the number that we went suspended, but game in the first place.
And you said last night that this isn't about basketball. You have a mom who's 82 years old and kids. What are you doing to try to ensure that they stay safe?
You know, just trying to be vigilant, as I said. I mean, you know, trying to reduce their circle of friends, you know, keeping, you know, they're about to go into spring break, and rather than going into some place that's going to be populous and crowded, just, you know, creating family time. This is going to be the definition of forced family fun.
Forced family
we're
fun.
going to have things that, yeah, we're going to have things that we have to do.
Whether you like it or not, you're staying at home with your family. So what are you and other
Exactly.
What are you and other owners plan on doing to try to compensate hourly workers who now won't be working?
Well, I can't speak for other owners, but, you know, it was a program that I put together for our arena workers and hourly workers that work for the Mavericks, because now that the games are suspended, they're not going to have that income. And so that just wasn't right to me. So we'll compensate them in advance. Even if the games might be played in the future, we'll still compensate them now so they can pay their bills. And we'll do that for arena employees for the Mavs games and for hourly employees that work for the Mavericks that might not get those hours.
And just curious, on a personal level, do you feel that the government is doing enough, and might you consider using your own resources to help the Texas community?
You know what? I don't know. You know, you can come to conclusions on both sides, but I do know that I'm not a big fan of trickle down, but I am a big fan of trickle up economics, where, you know, people that are in my position really try to support the community, really encourage people to work with contractors that, South by Southwest was canceled. There are contractors there. There are events. There's weddings that are being canceled left and right. And so where we can support those vendors, where I can give them extra work, where, we can do anything to help them and encourage others to do the same, that's exactly what we're going to do. Because this is a community effort, and North Texas is great about this. And we really just have to support those around us, because that's just the only thing that's going to work.
And finally, back to sports for a moment, because it is a welcome distraction for so many Americans, as you know. The CEO of the Atlanta Hawks suggested at a conference last week that the NBA should slide the season so that the playoffs and finals go into July or even August. If you're able to resume this season, is that something that you think that the league should do as a trial this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, safety first, and that's the primary consideration. But beyond that, and I've had the conversation with the league for years that we really could go into July and August. The argument has been there aren't enough homes watching television. But as you know, the television industry has changed dramatically, so that might be different this summer. I'm all for playing over the summer.
All right, Mark, thank you again so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And when we come back, an update on our friend.
Quick update, we're still doing well. We started receiving some of our medications. They delivered it to us, and we've been getting our temperatures checked twice a day. We still haven't heard about the testing, but we know that a lot of new passengers came to the Air Force Base yesterday, and I'm sure they're getting things in order. What have you been doing to keep busy in quarantine?
Taking naps.
Yeah, and what else?
A lot of naps.
Now we're going for a walk. Here's Grandma.
A lot of naps and walks for our favorite trio under quarantine. This is day 3 of them for our friends Michelle Heckard and her grandparents spending lots of quality time together while under quarantine at Travis Air Force Base after nearly 24 cases of COVID-19 were confirmed on their cruise ship. And before we go, a quick PSA from a 6-year-old Wilder who wanted to ensure we all know how to properly wash our hands.
What are you showing us today?
How to wash our hands.
Awesome. And what are we protecting ourselves from?
Corona.
Corona.
First we do this.
And what's that called?
Pray.
Pray. And then what do we do?
This.
Pet the dog.
This is pet the dog.
Mm-hmm.
This is butterfly.
Butterfly, uh-huh.
This is milk the cow.
Okay.
And then after that, you have to do spiders.
How does spiders go?
Like this.
And spiders gets all the yucks out from under your nails, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we rinse.
And what was that? Let's see. Butterfly, pet the dog, and pray. A lot of people doing that at this time. What a good job. Thank you so much to Wilder for those excellent tips. That's our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.
COVID-19 grows around the world